go. This tutorial is for oil paint. First, I want to go over the materials that you need to begin oil painting. I'll talk a little bit about the brushes, what the function of a palette knife is, different types of tools that you might use. So you need all this stuff. You need a rag, not a paper towel. Paper towels work okay, but they aren't as good to wipe away when you're painting, and sometimes you'll need to wipe away. So an old t-shirt or piece of cloth is super handy. Then brushes. There are lots of different types of brushes in the world. There are synthetic brushes. You're probably used to seeing these because we use them for acrylic paint. These are made with synthetic fibers that are meant to kind of mimic sable or the softer fibers. So they're less expensive than actual sable brushes like this one. Some brushes can cost, well, they can cost as much as you want to spend, but sable's very expensive. And so a synthetic substitute is sufficient. It just might not last forever and ever and ever, like your whole life, whereas this one probably would if you take care of it. So the best thing to do is buy brushes in person if you can. It's kind of tricky right now, but you'll get the feel for what kind of brushes you like. This one has stiffer bristles. This is another synthetic brush. And then these two are hog bristle brushes. They're made from pig bristles. And again, some brushes by some manufacturers are softer than others. The higher quality brushes typically are a little bit softer, but they have stiffer fibers, and that's good for pushing the paint around because, as you'll notice, the oil paint is much, much thicker than acrylic. It feels more like butter in consistency. So the brushes serve different purposes. These ones are for underpainting. The hog bristle are for underpainting or large areas of color, or mark making that's more like thick paint, where you're doing impasto kind of techniques. And the softer brushes are good for blending or for fine detail work. Then a palette knife. This is important. When you're mixing your color, rather than using your brushes to mix your color, it's best to get in the habit of using a palette knife because the paint is thicker, so palette knife gives you more control over how mixed it is. Maybe sometimes you want a completely homogeneous color, and maybe sometimes you want parts of the white and parts of the yellow to show through. So the palette knife is what you'll use to mix your color. It also can be used for painting, so you can scoop up some color and put it directly on your canvas with the palette knife. And they come in different sizes and shapes. I like these long flat ones myself, but experiment with them and try different types to see what you like. Then the paint itself. There are tons of different brands. Winton is a good quality student grade. We have some of these in the classroom. We have not much. We're running a little bit low on white especially, so if you're planning to do oil face to face, you might want to pick up a tube of white. I wanted to touch on toxicity in oil paint because it's one of the main concerns when switching to this medium. You can do oil paint in a non-toxic way, but you just have to be careful and be aware of the labeling. Any art supply will have a safety label. This one is yellow ochre, and it says AP non-toxic. See if I can focus on that a little better. So you know that this one is safe to use. It still might cause dryness on your skin, or some people have sensitivities to things, so a lot of artists choose to use gloves all the time and just get used to doing that. Then it's easier to clean up. Oil paint is a little tricky to get off your skin, but you know that it's not going to seep into your bloodstream and cause problems for you later in life. This one also, this is burnt sienna, and this also has a label on it. Sometimes they look a little different. This one doesn't say non-toxic, but it says Art and Creative Materials Institute certified, conforms to blah, 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 blah. And this label means that it's non-toxic as well. A lot of the earth tones and most of the colors are non-toxic, and student grade materials typically are non-toxic because things like cadmium, like if you use cadmium yellow or cadmium red, if it's an artist grade supply, they use the actual pigments, which are heavy metals, and those can absorb into your skin, into your bloodstream, and cause problems. They're toxic. But when it's student grade material, to cut costs, they use a synthetic equivalent of that, and typically it's not toxic. But it's good to always just be in the habit of checking your labels. I'll show you a couple that are bad for you. And these were donations, so we don't use these in class because I try to keep as non-toxic as possible. This is Damar varnish. It's a traditional varnish that you would use at the end of your oil painting once everything's dry. Looks beautiful, but it's terrible for you. Don't use it. It has the big X right here. It's a fire hazard. And then it also says harmful, in little letters right here. And it usually has a warning that explains a little bit more about what's harmful about it. Breathing the vapors is bad for you. Fatal if swallowed. Yeah, don't use this. We'll leave that to the pros. Terpenoid is another thing that is not great for you to inhale. This is a paint thinner. This one has a health label that looks like this, and it doesn't really indicate a whole lot right here, except that it says health label, and that's an indication that something else is going on. So you need to look on the rest of the packaging for the danger zone, and it tells you right here that it's combustible, don't swallow it, don't breathe the vapors, and it gives you lots of information. So pay attention to your labeling because it's important. Okay, back to the fun stuff. This terpenoid that I just showed you that is kind of toxic, it's used as a paint thinner. And so I have a little bit of it in here. Ideally, you would paint outside. If you can't paint outside, be near a window or good ventilation when you're using this because it's odorless. Terpenoid is odor. It has a little bit of a smell, but it's not really, really strong. So the fumes can build up around you and you wouldn't notice. So just be careful when you're working that you have good ventilation. I usually recommend one that's called Gamsol. It's by Gamblin. Gamblin is known for being aware of safety issues in their products, and so they're a little bit less hazardous than others. So when you first begin a painting, there's this idea of fat over lean is what it's called, and what it means is you start out your painting with thinned down paint, and as you progress and the layers build up, your paint gets fattier, as in more oil. So this cuts the oil, it makes it thinner, and it works kind of like with acrylic. If you were adding water to your paint, it does similar things, but this is oil paint, and oil and water don't mix, so you're mixing the paint thinner in with it. I'm going to do this silly photo of myself with a light bulb and an umbrella. So I want to start by doing just the underpainting. So I'm going to dip my paintbrush in the solvent, the thinner. And then when you're doing your underpainting, it doesn't have to be your exact colors yet. It's good to use neutrals and to keep the values pretty light because you're going to be painting over it. So I'm going to show you how to thin the paint, do the underpainting, and work with blocking all kind of at the same time. So I'm going to touch the brush to the edge. You always want to work from the edges of your paint to reserve like this reservoir of clean paint over here. Oh, and I didn't talk about the palette. I'm working on a piece of plastic. Glass is better if you have it. An old picture frame works great because you can scrape it off with a paint scraper, or a styrofoam plate, or anything that's a non-porous surface you can use as a palette. Ceramic tiles work. Okay, so I've thinned this down, and then looking at my reference photo, I can't put my phone down because there's oil paint there now. I'm going to look generally at the proportions, and I'm not doing anything detailed. Blocking is just like getting the general angles, proportions, and shapes in before you start the actual painting. Notice that I didn't draw it first, because if you're thinning down your paint anyway, and you're doing this blocking method, you don't have to. Graphite, you can draw with graphite first and then work on top of it with oil paint, but the graphite will mix in. Let me show you. It'll mix in with your paint. So say I had drawn like my hair first, and then I go to paint over it. You can see how it smears. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe you want that aesthetic, but just to know it does that. So I think it's good practice just to dive right in with the paint. You can always adjust and fix things. So I'm just getting the general shape of my body in there. The light bulb is going to be here, so I'm going to switch colors. I'm adding a little bit more paint thinner to it, the mineral spirits. Light bulb goes there-ish. I just did a slight color change to indicate that that's a different thing. I like notes to self. As you're working, you have your cloth handy, and so you can wipe, sorry, I'm trying to get everything in the camera, wipe your brush in between colors to get most of it off. It's trickier to wash your brushes as you're painting, so wiping off the majority of it is usually the method that I go with, rather than washing in between each color, especially for underpainting. Because it doesn't have to be perfect. So here's my body, and then do a little bit lighter value for this umbrella that's above me. It has like these curves right here, so I'm kind of putting the curve in, but other than that, not a whole lot of detail. And you could even use a bigger brush than this. For your underpaintings, it's good to use the largest brush that you have and just fill in as much space as possible. It's a good habit to work the entire canvas all at once, because the colors that you use can inform the rest of your piece. So if you have blues in one section, it might make a decision for you, like whether you want orange in this other section or if you want a different color. So like whatever you do depends on what's around it. All right, that ends here. My proportion might be a little bit off because you can see my arm ends at the side of the phone right there, and the umbrella is completely behind it, and I've got a whole bunch of room here. It's also a slightly different proportion. This photo is long and narrow, and this is a little bit wider. So you make decisions about how important that is to you. So after you get this blocking stage in, then you can start the actual underpainting, where you're starting to refine it and get the values a little bit more solid. I'm going to indicate like where my hair is, but still keeping it pretty loose and not getting caught up yet in details. If you do come across a place that you want to revise, and you'll notice that this doesn't dry very quickly at all, then you would take your cloth and wipe away. And it's kind of like an eraser. Just keep track of where your dirty parts are. Oh, cover your surface, your work surface. If you're working at the kitchen table or anything like that, you want to make sure that it's protected. And plastic is best because it's impermeable. So I like to use a trash bag, and then I just cut up the trash bag into a big sheet and lay that down on the table. If you have an easel, that's awesome. Use that. If you have a dedicated workspace where you can leave all this stuff out, that's awesome too. Because this paint that I have out on the palette will not dry anytime soon. So you can continue using it. I actually squeezed out quite a bit. That's way more than I needed just for the underpainting. But I can keep using it as I go. You might want to use a little bit of saran wrap on the palette just to keep it nice and fresh. But you can continue to use it for days and days and days. So I'm just going to continue working on this preliminary layer. I'll speed it up a little bit for you. And then I think I'll continue to progress on this as we go, and then show you more techniques as far as like refining it even more. And then I'm going to do a separate video on cleaning your brushes. Sorry if that was out of focus. Cleaning the brushes, well actually I'm going to walk you through it right now because you're going to need to clean your brush. Cleaning your brushes is different than acrylic because oil is not water soluble. So the best way to do it is to wipe off the majority of the paint on your rag. For this part I do sometimes use paper towels just because they're disposable. Be careful though, because when you're throwing things away, if you have a rag or a paper towel that's soaked with this mineral spirit paint solvent kind of stuff, it's flammable, and heat can make it ignite. So you don't want to throw it out and then put it in your trash can outside right away if it's a hot day, just to be on the super safe side. You could put everything in a Ziploc bag, like a big gallon Ziploc bag, and then throw it away when you know trash day is coming, like right before the garbage is collected. And then make sure that it's like dried out as possible, because you also don't want it to catch fire in the trash truck. So you would wipe off the majority of your paint and then use the mineral spirit to clean it even more, to dissolve the paint that's still left on here. They do make non-toxic brush cleaners. There's one that has an orange scent. There's one that's called Winsor & Newton Brush Cleaner and Restorer. That's my favorite one. It's non-toxic and it works really great. And you can reuse it. These little cups, I got these at H-E-B, and they're awesome because they were cheap and they have a lid. So if you have one that you dedicate for your brush cleaning, always keep the lid on it because you don't want the vapors getting out. But you can reuse this. It's okay if it gets kind of muddy and gross because you're just using it to clean your brush. So you would dip your brush in there, swirl it all around, and that dissolves your paint even more. And then continue to wipe it off as you do that. And then when you get most of the paint off, it's pretty much clean, then you take it to the sink and use soap and water to clean the rest of it, just like you would an acrylic brush. And Dawn dish soap works really well for oil paint because it cuts grease. So if you have Dawn around, I would use that. And then you can rest your brush wherever to let it dry. I am finished talking, I think. Okay, so I'm just going to speed this up a little bit and do a little bit more of the underpainting and blocking, and more to come.